Number 1. This happened when I was only 16 years old. I had gotten my first real girlfriend and she lived in the same neighbourhood as I did. This meant that we didn't have to rely on driving to hang out. About a half-hour walk from my place is this abandoned lot. It was probably intended to be a neighbourhood originally, but was never actually finished, or started for that matter. Because of this, it's basically a bunch of winding, smooth concrete paths that borders small fields of incredibly tall grass. Although it was never started, a sewage area was added to it, a small fenced-in area with a couple grates and a machine of some sort. And it had a hole that was obviously deliberately made on the side of the fence, big enough for a relatively small person to fit through. The interesting part, however, was the unrealistic amount of new, yet empty cans of beer and several empty food containers. There were enough cans strewn about the small area to probably fill half of a dumpster. We'd hang out in there before, as it's generally pretty quiet. I'd joke with my girlfriend and tell her that a homeless guy probably lived here, and she would joke back and tell me to stop. Prior to this story, I'd never felt uncomfortable inside of there. One day, we decided to go there as it had rained pretty hard the night before, so we couldn't hang out in the woods like we usually did. We walked there and sat inside, talking like usual. Today, for some reason, I felt slightly paranoid. I looked around the area a lot more, and was a bit restless. My girlfriend Ellie asked me if I was okay a couple times, and I kept reassuring her that I was fine. Upon one of my glances, I noticed something that I hadn't before. Behind one of the metal poles supporting the fence boards was a dry, brown paper bag stuffed between there and the board. It was one thing if there was a bunch of random trash around the place, but bags don't just get shoved into cracks by the wind. I knew it was done intentionally. I started to get up to investigate the bag, when my sliver of paranoia turned into a full metric ton of it. It had rained that night before, and the bag was dry. If you don't understand what this meant, it meant that it had to have been placed there that day. I decided not to touch the bag just in case it had drugs or a gun or something inside, and kept talking to my girlfriend. The paranoia finally came to its climax. While talking with Ellie, I heard movement in the aforementioned tall grass nearby. I didn't frequently go outside, but I could still tell when something was bigger than a small animal. I covered Ellie's mouth with my hand and mentioned for her to be silent with my other, and listened for a minute, hearing the sound again, but louder. I pulled her close and whispered something along the lines of, "Do not move, do not make a sound, I'll be right back." She seemed confused, but nodded in agreement. I slowly and quietly creeped through the hole in the fence, walking out of view from the direction of the movement, until I was far enough to see whatever was there. I will never forget what my eyes fell upon. In the direction of the movement, maybe 15 feet from the fenced area, was a middle-aged man in a red jacket and some blue jeans. He seemed fairly lanky, downright bony actually, with thin hair. That wasn't the scariest part, however. He was crawling on his stomach towards the fence. Terrified, I tried to begin moving back towards the hole, when I realized that in my fear, I hadn't tried masking my footsteps. The man instantly stopped moving and swung his head to meet my eyes. Upon meeting my eyes, he quickly got up and started walking towards me. Terror turning into shock at this point, I was unable to move as he put one hand into his pocket to grip something, and his walk became a jog. The only thought that I could keep straight in my head was that of trying to figure out what to say as so not to be killed by the guy. I managed to speed walk away from the fence and put some distance between me, the man, and Ellie, and I felt a bit better, until I turned around to see something even more terrifying. The man's jog was now a sprint. In all of my life, I have never seen someone run as fast as he did. It was almost inhuman. I stopped walking, knowing full well that I wasn't going to outrun the man. I resigned myself to whatever was going to happen. He closed the gap between us probably 50 plus feet in a matter of seconds, and he stopped beside me, his hand holding whatever was in his pocket with a death grip. He finally said something.
"Hey, can I ask a question?"
It was then that I noticed how much he was twitching, his inability to stand still, and his erratic voice. and realized that the bag that my paranoia told me was drugs might very well have been just that. Trying to keep my calm the best that I could, I responded with, "Yeah, what's up, man?" Still twitching, he said,
Why is it that you guys keep trying to follow me?
His voice had a suspicious and a paranoid tone at this point, and I realized that if I wasn't very careful with what I said, he could snap at any moment. "We didn't know you were here, man. We just hang out here sometimes. It's all cool. We don't know who you are,"
Hang out?
he replied, as if he had no idea what the phrase meant. I opened my mouth to elaborate, when he bolted at the same speed down the path that Ellie and I had taken to get here, disappearing around a turn. I shook off the shock, and immediately pulled out my phone, dialing Ellie. She usually has her phone on silent, but I was incredibly lucky as she picked up relatively quickly. "Hello?" she said, confused. "Ellie, listen to me. Don't think about what I'm about to say to you. Just do it. Fucking run. Right now. Run." A couple seconds later, I saw her pop out of the fenced area and run towards me. She asked me what happened, and I promised to tell her later, but first we had to get out. Remember how I said that the lot was full of winding road with tall grass? This meant that the man could have literally been anywhere. Knowing full well that the man most likely knew where we came from and was waiting to ambush us, I took her by the hand and bolted down an alternate route back to the road leading back to our neighborhood. Then I saw an abandoned couch that had been dumped there. Luck was again on my side as it had been turned upside down. I grabbed one of the boards of the frame and, taking advantage of the massive amount of adrenaline pumping through me, ripped it out of the couch, several nails still attached at the end. Ellie's hand in one hand, my makeshift weapon in the other, we hurried to the road through the longer detour. When we finally reached our destination, from our location we could see our original route, and I took a cautionary look, gripping the blunt weapon tightly, almost dropping it in shock. In the grass of the original road we took, I could see a distinctly red shape and a hand holding something metal. Ellie started to turn to look, and saw what I saw too. We ran back home, miraculously unharmed. I don't believe in miracles or anything like that, but I'm pretty sure that if I hadn't decided to take the long way around, we both could have been killed. Number 2. When I was 14 years old, I would spend the summer holidays away from school at home. In the small village I lived in, this meant that I mainly spent my days on my own while my parents worked, watching TV and playing The Sims. My parents were generally out of the house from 8 AM until 5 PM. I was raised to never answer the door to strangers. However, where I liked to sit in the living room, my chair was next to the window anyway, so I could always see people on the street, and they could see me too, I guess. One day, I was sat watching daytime TV, when I noticed a man walking down our street. As our street is a dead end, I normally recognize everyone who walks down it, but I had certainly never seen him before. He was tall, thin, and unshaven. He was wearing a hooded jumper with the hood up and sleeves rolled up, revealing the tattoos on his arms. He was carrying a large duffel bag, and was looking closely at each house as he passed. As I was sat watching him, I was clearly in full view of him too. He started to pass our house, and when he saw me, he smiled and turned to come up our short drive. He came up to our front door and knocked. I knew I shouldn't answer the door to someone I don't know, but he had seen me, and at 14 I was afraid of being rude to an adult. So I obediently went and opened the door a crack. I peeked around the door and said hello. As he spoke, he pulled the duffel bag around to the front of his body and asked me if my parents were home. At this point, I thought he would probably leave if I said no, but instead he stepped towards the door and unzipped the bag.
Well, the thing is, I've just got out of prison. I want to do the right thing, you know. It's so hard to find a job, so I'm trying to sell some things.
He started pulling towels, handkerchiefs, and other junk out of his bag. The word prison made my heart skip, and I quickly mumbled something about having no money and closed the door. He stood on the step for a minute, still talking to me about being able to help, so I went upstairs and waited for him to leave, which he did. I soon settled back down to watching TV and forgot all about my encounter. At 5 PM, My parents came home and took the TV, so I went up to my room. A little while later, there was a knock at the door. I came onto the landing and peered down as my mum answered. 2 police officers had stood on the step. They asked if anyone had called at our house that day. My mum said no one had, and that was when I remembered my visitor from earlier. I came down the stairs and said that actually someone had called. Seeing I was young, the police officers asked to come inside and talk to me. They asked me to describe the man and the conversation I had with him. They seemed really worried and kept telling me not to worry and to be honest about what had happened. Once I had told them what had happened, they asked to speak to my parents on their own, and then they thanked me and left. I was straight on at my parents asking what was going on. My mum explained that a few minutes after the guy had come to our house, he had gone to another girl's house. She was in the shower and hadn't answered the door when he knocked. Apparently, he let himself into the house and walked upstairs. Then he found her in the shower and sexually assaulted her. With my description and the evidence from the girl, they tracked the guy down. It turned out he had just been released from prison for a similar attack on another girl. I never answer the door whenever I'm alone now. And also, I won't shower when I'm home alone. Number 3. This happened at the beginning of the year when everything in my city is really quiet and lonely because everyone is on vacation. It was around 4 PM, and I had gone to a mall that's near my house to get some waxing done, only to find the place closed because of what I've said above, that everyone was on vacation. I exited the place and I heard a strange laughter to my left that caught my attention. I turned to see a tall man, nothing particularly strange about him, except for the fact that he was completely alone, walking in the opposite direction of where I was going. The man noticed that I'd looked at him, so he changed directions to head in the same direction I was going. I started to get a little nervous as the man was walking behind me and continued to emit the same weird laughter, always with the same tone, like the same laugh replayed again and again. The streets were completely lonely, so I started walking faster. Suddenly, the man got really close behind me and I heard him say,
"This is where you're going to die."
We were in a sidewalk next to an empty lot that is used nowadays as a parking lot. Now, I got really scared and I walked as fast as I could without running. Luckily for me, I suddenly ran into a girl that used to work with me on a candy store back in 2014. I said hi to her and I immediately told her that this weird guy was following me and laughing all by himself, and I turned around to point at him. By that point, the guy had suddenly crossed the street and was quite far away now, but still staring at me. He obviously changed his mind about following me after I ran into an acquaintance. He continued to walk along the opposite sidewalk until I lost track of him. I haven't seen him again, even though I walk the same street frequently. Number 4. When I was 18, I worked as a nursing assistant on a surgical floor. We got a range of patients that varied from gallbladders to knee replacements. I worked with another assistant and we split the floor in half. She got one hallway and I got the other. She went on a break, so I responded to the call lights on both halls. One of her patients rang out, so I went to help. The lady's son stepped out while I assisted her to the bedside commode. I came out and told him I was done and he could go back in. Instead, he chose to talk to me. We exchanged some small talk and he went back into the room when his mother called for him. The other assistant came back and I continued working. I went to charge at the nurse's station and the son came out and began chatting with me again. It was the middle of the night, nothing good was on TV at this time, and I assumed he was just bored. I got up to attend my patient and he followed me, asking lots of questions. How old I was, if I was going to school, how long I had worked here. He even waited outside patients' rooms till I came out. I should have mentioned earlier that this guy did not have the usual creeper vibe. He was a clean-cut guy, perhaps in his late 20s. He was charming and funny. I guess his appearance delayed my creeper sense, and I dismissed his behaviour as being socially awkward. He continued to talk to me, and I tried to drop subtle hints that I had a boyfriend, although I didn't. Towards the end of my shift, he became a little more aggressive. He told me,
"Well, I guess I'll have to kill him,"
referring to my boyfriend I spoke about. He said it with a laugh, and then told me he would walk me to my car when my shift was over. He then left to check on his mother. At this point, I was creeped the fuck out. I went to bed, and when I got home at around noon, the day shift charge nurse called me. She told me not to come in. She said the son had been asking about me. He asked when I worked, what my real name was, and more personal information. When she wouldn't tell him, he asked other nurses. His mum was going home that day, she said, so I could probably come back tomorrow. Tomorrow came and my manager called me. She told me to stay home the rest of the week. The son had sent flowers to the floor and had called every floor asking about me. She said she didn't feel like it was safe for me to come back. Eventually, he quit calling and I came back to work. About 3 months later, I was watching the news. He had been arrested for rape and murder. Number 5. This happened when I was about 16-17 years old, living with my parents in a dodgy suburb in Australia. Lots of bad things happened often, and the town was mostly made up of government housing. Not long before this, a guy was killed across the street with a machete, over meth probably. Anyway, it was about 1 or 2 AM and I woke up to my little brother standing at my bed. He said something along the lines of, "Nana needs help." Our Nan has almost always lived with us. She loves to drink and smoke and is getting on with her age, so I immediately thought something happened, like maybe she fell out of bed from being drunk. I really didn't want to get up. I was pretty confused as to why my brother came to me instead of my dad. But then I heard sobbing. I went down into her room and found her sitting on her bed, frozen with fear, with the blanket all pulled up around her like a scared little kid. I could make out another figure laying on the bed with her. It was an old woman in a gown, and she was crying hysterically. I've watched way too many horror movies with my nan and legged it into my dad's room to try and wake him up. He thought the same thing as I did, that maybe Nan had a bit too much to drink and fell out of bed. He almost wouldn't get up to help. I told him there was someone inside, and he was up in an instant and on the phone to the police. Me and my dad and my brother and my nan were all standing in the dark in the living room while this crazy woman ran around the house screaming that she needed towels because her babies were coming. She was convinced she was in labor and was screaming and crying. She wanted like 10 towels and kept demanding them for her babies. We called the police and they arrived in about 5 minutes. They pretty much just drive around this part of town all night. It's not even very big. We tried to calm her down, but she was out of her mind. We all figured she was harmless, but it was still shocking to wake up at 2 AM. Turns out she had run from an aged care home that was like half an hour away. I have no idea how she made it into our house with no shoes, and we made my nan always double check the locks after she went out for a smoke. She resisted the police for a while out at the front door, and caused a lot of commotion. From memory, they called an ambulance to come and sedate her and return her to the aged care home. Out of all my creepy encounters living in that town, this one is definitely the most bizarre. Number 6. So, this happened to me while I went to folk school, a type of school where people go to, mostly after graduation to study their hobbies, without grades or anything, just a year of pleasure and fun. In my case, it was horses and equestrianism. So, almost all the students in this school were girls. The school was located in a small village. We lived in pavilions with 8 bedrooms, 1 bathroom and a living room. The living room was in the middle of the pavilion and the entrance was connected to it. My room was located so I could face straight to the front door in the entrance by standing in my room door. Now, to the story. This happened on a Saturday. Every girl in my pavilion was out drinking except me and another girl, Tina. We hadn't locked the front door this night due to the fact that some of the girls were out drinking and didn't have their keys. I was asleep and woke up at around 1 AM from hearing a man's voice yelling something in the living room. I thought one of the other girls had taken a guy home or something, so I went to have a look. Wearing nothing but underpants and a tank top, I slowly opened my door. In the living room was a man, just standing there staring at me in the dark. He was bald, middle-aged, and he wore a dirty leather jacket and looked like one of those Nazi murderers you see in the movies. Really, the only thing he was missing was a swastika tattooed on his forehead.
"You wanna go have a drink?"
He yelled really loud. I was so afraid I couldn't move. Suddenly, Tina opened her door to see what was going on. I can't remember exactly what she said, but she had the guts to talk back to this man. She waved at me, signaling that I should come into her room. Luckily, my door was diagonal with her door, so I ran a few steps over to hers, and we locked ourselves in. We called the teacher who was on guard that night. After a couple of minutes, the man had disappeared, and we talked with our teacher. "Probably just another drunk local idiot, nothing to worry about," she said before she left. After this happened, we sat in the living room, front door locked this time, just to talk. We couldn't sleep, we were too scared for that shit. Guess what? The man's face suddenly appeared in the window next to the front door. We screamed like stabbed rats and went to hide in Tina's room again. After that, we didn't see or hear anything from him again. We sat up waiting for the other girls the rest of the night. Just to sum this up, some students in another pavilion woke up to find a tramp sleeping on one of the couches in their living room one time. So, this was actually pretty common at our school.
Hey guys, it's the Grim Reader. So, thank you very much for listening to this video. If you enjoyed, why not check out my other videos by clicking on the links on the screen. Also, don't forget to like, subscribe and share. Thanks a lot for listening.
It was one thing if there was a bunch of random trash around the place, but bags don't just get shoved into cracks by the wind. I knew it was done intentionally. I started to get up to investigate the bag, when my sliver of paranoia turned into a full metric ton of it. It had rained that night before, and the bag was dry. If you don't understand what this meant, it meant that it had to have been placed there that day. I decided not to touch the bag just in case it had drugs or a gun or something inside, and kept talking to my girlfriend. Cans of beer and several empty food containers. There were enough cans strewn about the small area to probably fill half of a dumpster. We'd hang out in there before, as it's generally pretty quiet. I'd joke with my girlfriend and tell her that a homeless guy probably lived here, and she would joke back and tell me to stop. Prior to this story, I'd never felt uncomfortable inside of there. One day, we decided to go there as it had rained pretty hard the night before, so we couldn't hang out in the woods like we usually did.
Number 1.
This happened when I was only 16 years old. I had gotten my first real girlfriend and she lived in the same neighborhood as I did. This meant that we didn't have to rely on driving to hang out. About a half-hour walk from my place is this abandoned lot. It was probably intended to be a neighborhood originally, but was never actually finished, or started for that matter. Because of this, it's basically a bunch of winding, smooth concrete paths that borders small fields of incredibly tall grass. Although it was never started, a sewage area was added to it, a small fenced-in area with a couple grates and a machine of some sort. And it had a hole that was obviously deliberately made on the side of the fence, big enough for a relatively small person to fit through. The interesting part, however, was the unrealistic amount of new, yet empty. We walked there and sat inside, talking like usual. Today, for some reason, I felt slightly paranoid. I looked around the area a lot more, and was a bit restless. My girlfriend Ellie asked me if I was okay a couple times, and I kept reassuring her that I was fine. Upon one of my glances, I noticed something that I hadn't before. Behind one of the metal poles supporting the fence boards was a dry, brown paper bag stuffed between there and the board.